This government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Step inside the octagon, best believe the drama's on. All bets are off when the sound of the bell is gone. Searching for the infamy as sweet as a symphony. Time to grab the moment.
You are listening to the TGB Report, brought to you by the FPRN Radio Network. Now live from State College, Pennsylvania, here is your host, Thomas Brown.
Bring the pain, damage your competitors, a modern day predator, killing credibility, just like a senator, a menace to society, better keep your eye on me, understand my fire.
Welcome back again, folks. It's June. I almost said it was July, but it's June 5th, 2013. And we've got a great show here for you on the FPRN Radio Network. And we've got guests from the conservatives concerned about the death penalty, and they're Mark Hayden and Heather Bodine. Mark is from the formerly with the NRA, and Heather is been a member of the National Republican Committee, as well as working with the Senate Majority Leader in Michigan. Mark, Heather, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks so much.
What I wanted to start off is maybe you guys could explain or go about telling the story of how this group came about and how it's been received in a community, conservatives, that are traditionally pro-death penalty as opposed to anti-death penalty.
Well, conservatives concerned about the death penalty, it's a national network of conservatives as well as libertarians, and we all question the alignment of capital punishment with our conservative principles. This effort actually grew out of a coalition that started in Montana that Heather was heavily involved in. And the coalition was of elected conservative leaders who discovered they weren't alone. There was many others who opposed this expensive and most oftenly inaccurate government program. So as that movement grew, the grassroots demanded that a national group be created, and that's where we came in. We responded to that need, and we just recently debuted at CPAC 2013 in Maryland, and the reception was fantastic. There's a hunger out there from conservatives to see a group that is willing to spearhead this, and the most common thing we heard while we were there was, "Where have you guys been for so long?" I thought I was the only conservative who believes the death penalty should be repealed. So we've been getting great reviews and warm reception everywhere we've been.
Yeah, I felt that way for a long time as well. Am I the only conservative who's against the death penalty? So I'm glad you guys are starting to put something like this together. Maybe one or both of you could sort of explain some of the issues surrounding death penalty. I guess we could start with the fallibility of it and how people have been shown to have either been put on death row or actually executed wrongly.
Well, there's an unacceptable probability of executing innocent people. Not just conservatives, everybody across the board should be opposed to that. And you can look at an average of roughly for every 10 people who have been executed, at least one is released because they were wrongly convicted. Now, many others are executed even though there's serious doubt regarding their verdict. You can look at the case of Carlos de Luna. There was some very serious doubt with that case. And, regardless of the judicial system, they have really good intentions, but they can't be right 100% of the time. And people always want to talk about us living in the DNA age, but DNA is only available in 5 to 10% of criminal cases. And if you don't have it in 90 to 95% of it, that should still make you feel very uncomfortable.
And if I could add to that too, Tom, a lot of people, like Mark said, think that DNA is the answer. But unfortunately, even when DNA evidence is available, we have to remember who's handling that evidence. And those are human beings, and people are obviously not perfect. And so there have been cases, many cases, where there was DNA evidence available, but the DNA technician purposely or not on purpose didn't get the results correct. And so there are mistakes that happen even when DNA is available.
Yeah, I've seen countless cases or news stories where a forensic lab got in trouble for mishandling or outright lying on DNA samples. So when you've got, even when you don't have that type of corruption going on, you do have mistakes. So yeah, that is one thing that I don't know if a lot of people actually think that through when they're discussing the death penalty. But
Right. Absolutely.
yeah, I wanted to say the other side is that the immense amount of cost compared to just housing somebody in a prison for a life sentence versus death penalty. When I was doing some research for this, I saw that it was hugely more expensive. Maybe you could get into that a little bit.
Well, the costs vary from state to state, but every state that has a study has said that it is vastly more expensive. Studies have shown that it's up to 20 times more expensive than cases that carry the sentence of life without the possibility of parole. California, since 1978, has spent just over $4 billion just to maintain this program, but it also goes down to the local level. Jasper County, Texas, they were forced to raise their property taxes by 7% just to pay for one death penalty trial. But the costs go beyond that. It costs more to house these inmates. There's a decades-long appeals process that is vastly much more expensive. There's 2 initial trials as well, and the costs just keep snowballing from there. And I believe in Pennsylvania, it's a minimum of 3 times as much as imprisoning someone for life.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing that people don't think. I'm guessing that's where a lot of conservatives are really on board with this, is the cost factor. I think that's where you really hit them. Am I wrong in assuming that a lot of them see the cost?
Conservatives, and Heather can speak to this obviously from the faith side as well, but conservatives from across the board, they come to it for different reasons. The unacceptable probability of killing an innocent person is number one. Cost is obviously number 2, but it's a failed policy for victims' families. It's unfairly administered, doesn't make the public safer. And many others believe it gives the government too much power, and it's also contradictory to some of their pro-life views. And Heather, would you like to add some to the faith side?
Sure. Yes. I've been doing a lot of outreach to faith leaders and particularly evangelicals who have a real problem with taking the lives of individuals, even when they've committed a heinous crime. People of faith believe in redemption, and they don't want to take away the opportunity for a person to make their peace with God. I just wanted to add, when we're talking about this aspect of cost, it's pretty amazing that I feel like there are a lot of conservatives and just folks in general who don't know that the death penalty is so much more expensive than a sentence of life without parole. So oftentimes when we're talking to individuals, they come up and say, you want to do away with the death penalty. I don't want my tax dollars to go to support this person to live in prison for the rest of his life. Well, what they don't know is that, in fact, a death penalty sentence is so much more expensive. And that's because of a lot of things, as Mark said. The Supreme Court has said that death is different. And so there are 2 trials instead of 1, to determine guilt or innocence. And then there's an entire trial just for the sentencing phase. Obviously, there are more expert witnesses that are required and death qualified attorneys. And so the process is just much more strenuous and much more expensive. And we want it to be that way because we don't want to execute an innocent person. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 in that way as well. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it interesting that you could be pro-life, but then be pro-death penalty. That always perplexed me just as a person, not even anybody who's really somebody who's really has a good faith or is church going. It just never made sense to me. So
right, and we have a lot of support from the pro-life community, and I think that's gaining, in people who want to be consistent in their life ethic, that it's not just about abortion, it's about other issues too, and certainly the death penalty is one of those, when you're allowing the state to take away life, in the life of a perfectly healthy human being, granted one who's committed a really heinous act, but when we have alternatives like life without parole, where we can keep this person segregated, we can keep society safe. We have a lot of pro-life folks who say that there's no need to take this person's life away, and certainly there are lots of examples of people who've changed and have been used for good in prison, who've reached out to other prisoners and even correctional officers who've said, please keep this person alive on death row because they make the prison a more safe place. They're a great example here, and they're worth nothing to us after they've been executed. So certainly we're gaining a lot of support in the pro-life community as well.
That's good. I just lost my train of thought there. What I always found interesting when discussing the death penalty is, I don't, and I think you touched on this before, giving the state the power to kill somebody versus if they've done harm to you or your family member. It's more of a revenge thing that most people want to take on them, but you're, in a sense, letting the government take that revenge for you. It really doesn't seem like it does anybody any good, or make them feel any better about the crime or the death that has occurred, that has brought about the need for the death penalty in the first place. I don't know if either of you have thought about that at all.
A lot of people think that the death penalty is supposed to be there to serve the victim's family members. But what we've found out from talking to them is that it's just a decades-long process that re-traumatizes them. The death penalty does not offer closure. That is something that many others have also tried to say. But when we talk to these family members, they over and over again say that there is no closure for something like this, and that doesn't offer it. Now, I have talked with others who say that this just gives government too much power. They're worried about how the government operates certain government programs, and I can't speak to that from experience. But they're believe that maybe it doesn't work quite as efficiently. And then when you give them the power to put someone to death, that should be a program that you'd be a little concerned about, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we have many conservatives that we talk to who don't trust the government to do many things, and including, deliver our mail properly, but yet we trust them to decide who lives and dies and to carry out the sentence. And obviously this is a very broken policy and a broken government system in our country, and it's not working. So we've gained a lot of conservative attention and support when we talk about those issues.
Yeah, when you mentioned ineffective government services, I just thought about Obamacare and how they were for lack of a better term, the liberal media decided to attack anyone who was upset with the health care law being enacted, because it would give government control over basically your life, and whether or not any type of procedure would be deemed worthy for certain individuals. And you think they would see it, that, yeah, you don't want the government to control you there, and you don't want the government to kill people.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, we have another big problem with the death penalty system in deciding who gets the death penalty. It's supposed to be reserved for the worst of the worst, but actually 1% of murders in the United States have resulted in a death sentence over the last 10 years. So and a lot of times that can come down to simply geography and where where the murder took place from county to county, because so much of the decision is left up to the county prosecutor. So if you have a county attorney in one county who very much supports the death penalty, there's a good chance you could get the death penalty in that county for the very same crime that could happen next door in the next county, where maybe the prosecutor isn't as zealous about the death penalty. So we have real inequality happening here, and just the power in the hands of people to decide who lives and dies.
Right. Folks who are just joining us, we're speaking with Mark Hayden and Heather Bodine from Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. And if you want to call in, ask them any questions, you can give us a call at 567-314-9296. And the PIN number is 1234. In addition, you can follow us at fprnradio.com and go into the chat room and ask questions there as well. When you were talking, I noticed geography has a lot of to determine whether or not you would most likely get a death penalty. Like if you were in, say, a state like Texas, it's more likely. Ohio, Maryland, apparently, from what I've seen, they have a large percentage of death sentences in one or two counties, I believe, is what is reported on your site. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit more about the inequality of the system.
Sure. Mark, would you like to talk about that?
Well, sure. I mean, many states, Ohio, Maryland, and Tennessee in particular, have a large percentage of their death sentences that originate from just one or two counties. Shelby County, Tennessee comes to mind. The largest percentage of all death sentences is handed down there. And it's very unfair if you commit the exact same crime one county over. Odds are you're not going to receive it. And I believe one of the most recent statistics I saw was that 15% of all death sentences were handed down from just 30 counties across the United States. And there are a lot of counties. That's far less than 1% of all counties. So it really is just a lottery of geography, and that's very unfair, very arbitrary, and this unfairly administered by the government. Heather, do you have anything to add?
Sure. We can also talk about the fact that if you have money and you have a good attorney, you are most likely not going to get the death penalty, and how that's also a real problem with our system. We have many examples. The Green River Killer in Washington, who killed over 20 women, did not get the death penalty. But then you have someone in Texas who maybe didn't even commit the murder, but drove the getaway car and ends up executed because he can't afford his own attorney. And so this is a real problem. There's no consistency. It is very arbitrary, and this is something that conservatives are absolutely concerned about.
Right. Yeah. I've noticed that a lot of times, if you have a lot of money, you can pretty much buy yourself out of the problem. But if you're from a poor economic background, most likely you're going to get the public defender who's already overworked to begin with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also, if you look at the recent statistics I saw from Colorado, 4.3% of Coloradans are African American, but their death row is 100% African American. So there is a racial bias to it as well, and that's something that should definitely raise some red flags.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of and you pay for your lawyer's mistakes, which seems really awful. That if you have a bad lawyer, you're most likely going to be executed, rightly or wrongly, and it's because of their error, not yours.
Right.
And there's also cases where attorneys have been either drunk or asleep at trial when these capital cases were going on. So there are varying degrees of legal representation. You're absolutely correct.
Right. Yeah. And Is there any actual evidence that the death penalty actually keeps us safe? I honestly don't think that it really deters anybody from committing the crimes that are death penalty crimes, but I just wanted to get your take on it.
The National Research Council and another large organization both came out with studies saying that there's no credible evidence that the death penalty deters anybody from crime. And if you look at the region that uses the death penalty the most, they have the highest murder rates, and that's the South. So there isn't really any credible evidence supporting that, and that is one of the last bastions of hope I hear from people who support the death penalty. They say, well, at least it deters people from murder. And it doesn't appear to do that at all.
Yeah,
and along with that, we can talk about the fact that it diverts resources from law enforcement so that we could do things like crime prevention, and so when we talk to law enforcement about deterrence, they say real deterrents are more officers on the street or better training for their officers so that they can be better prepared to deal with situations. It's not the death penalty. And they realize that so many of these crimes that happen are crimes of passion where the person is acting out of rage or whatever it is. They haven't, thought about what they're doing and thought about the consequences, or they've decided that they're not going to get caught. And so, these aren't people like you and I who are rationally thinking this through ahead of time. So law enforcement that we talk to just say that they would much rather have, crime preventing resources available to them.
I've also heard, in addition to that, a lot of conservatives say either return this money to public safety where it can keep the public safer, or do the right thing and get rid of a program that doesn't work and return that money to the taxpayers.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Yeah, when I hear that it'll deter crime, it sort of makes me think of gun laws and gun restricting. Oh well, if we make these people register, if we change these laws, it's going to stop people from getting guns. No, it isn't. It's going to stop law-abiding citizens from getting guns. The people that were going to go act like a criminal to begin with, or commit a criminal act, are not going to follow the rules to begin with. That's why they're called criminals. And I think that sort of applies to the death penalty. I mean, it's not going to deter anybody who actually is going to go out and kill somebody.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly there.
Yeah. I mean, it makes no sense to me.
And, talking about how, you brought up the gun side of it and how there's this national debate between liberals and conservatives. I'm sure you, just like your viewers or listeners, can see there's not much that they can work together on. It seems like everything is a polarizing issue for both groups. But what we found with talking to people, conservatives are very open to this discussion about the death penalty. And we've also found that this might be an issue that we can bring both parties together. When I go speak to people at different groups, I see there's a hunger out there to see the death penalty repealed from conservatives as well as libertarians. And there's also a hunger to see an issue that brings both parties together. And from what I'm saying, this can be that issue.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, the bipartisanship, the left and the right, is sort of I've always viewed it as sort of a manufactured thing. I mean, if we really get down to the core, it's more, if we actually thought things through, it's more about us, the citizens, keeping the government in check. So it should be us against them and not us against us while they sit there and play in the shadows. And I think this is one issue where we could get a consensus between people who refer to themselves as liberals, people who refer to themselves as conservatives, people who refer to themselves as libertarians. I think everybody could get behind something like this if they just understood it a lot more. And that's why I think your group is really groundbreaking in that it's from what I understand, is the first of its kind, focusing just on conservatives against the death penalty.
Sure, and we've actually had a lot of help to get us to where we're at. We couldn't have done this by ourselves. From the beginning, we've had the counsel from and support from Jay Sekulow, Brent Bozell, and Richard Viguerie. I think everybody knows that they're quite conservative individuals. So we've had help from some national leaders as well. There's conservative grass tops leaders that are willing to go out on what they view as possibly a limb, but it's turned out to be not so much like that. And I think Heather could probably also add to some of her work with legislators, left and right, when she was in Montana.
Right. It was definitely a great experience in bringing folks together. On our bills in Montana, we had bipartisan support from, the most progressive Democrats who served in our Senate in Montana. And then we had, co-signers who were very conservative Republican legislators as well, and who had never signed a bill together before, but were partnering together for very different reasons, but because they wanted to have this conversation about the death penalty. And I think too often folks get wrapped up in, is the death penalty a good or a bad idea? But I think that we can all come together and say that regardless of sort of what you think about it in theory, the policy is failing. And we as American citizens should be concerned about all of these things that Mark and I have talked about the reality of executing an innocent person, about the waste of resources, about this process that is harmful for victims' family members. And so I think when we're able to sort of really take a look at the policy and how it's functioning, folks are willing to come to the table and talk together. And as I said before, we're finding that with evangelicals as well. We have national evangelical leaders who are very much against the death penalty and who haven't necessarily had a platform to talk about it before, but now are willing and ready to have this dialogue. And so I think it's a really exciting time, and I think conservatives are ready to speak up and to stand together and say this policy is failing, and we're ready to let it go.
Right.
We've talked a little bit about our national organization and how it came together, and I briefly mentioned a little bit about how it began in Montana, but I'd love Heather to, since she was there, to actually give her firsthand experience of what brought conservatives together in Montana to start the group that spurred us to create a national group.
Sure. Yes. So I worked for a group called the Montana Abolition Coalition, and we felt like there was this need for conservative legislators and other conservative leaders in Montana, who had held these individual views against the death penalty, but that they needed a space and a platform to be able to come together and to sort of have a dialogue about this and to reach out to their conservative colleagues. And so we just helped to create a space for that to happen in Montana, and it has grown exponentially. There are members all over the state now. They have a presence at the Republican Platform Convention every year. The death penalty has become an issue that is very comfortable for conservatives to talk about in the state of Montana. And like I said, they can talk about reasons why they're concerned and why we should all be concerned about the way that the death penalty is not working and not serving us as citizens. So it's been really great to see the support that we've gotten. And there are several other states across the country who are interested in starting up conservatives concerned about the death penalty groups in their states to also give platform to this issue, because we want to shatter this myth that being against the death penalty means you're a progressive liberal. Obviously, that's not the case for Mark or me or Jay Sekulow or Richard Viguerie. I mean, there are so many conservatives across this country who have concerns about this issue, and we want to raise those.
Right. And when we went to CPAC to have our official debut, we had state leaders come with us too. So this is not just from the top. This is grass tops down and grassroots up as well. We brought different people from Kentucky, Texas, Montana. Roy Brown, who was a gubernatorial candidate, ran for governor. He was also the House Majority Leader in Montana. And also we had a Republican city councilman from Kansas. So there's, this is not just in our area. This is across the United States. There is kind of a growing movement and a growing conversation, and we're seeing this dialogue being amplified.
Yeah, that's good. I'm gonna have to cut you off here. We're coming up on a break in a minute or two, and we can definitely continue this on the other side. For those of you who have just checked in, we're talking to Mark Hayden and Heather Bodine from the Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. And we'll be speaking to them more after this break.
Hi, I'm Chuck Norris, a black belt patriot. If some thug breaks into my home, I could use my roundhouse kick, but I'd prefer he look down the barrel of my gun. And millions of other law-abiding families also rely on their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Some politicians say they support your rights, but unfortunately, their voting records say otherwise. Protect your rights on Election Day. Check the candidates' records and see who stood up for your families and who protected the criminals. I'm Chuck Norris, and I approve this message.
Just let them try and outlaw those guns.
First, he made me feel special. He promised he'd look after me, provide for my future. He broke every promise he made. I was ready to leave, but he told me he'd change. So I gave him another chance. I was such a fool. Things only got worse. He started making my decisions for me about my job, my kids' education, my money, my safety, my future. He took away my choices. They all did. But I kept going back to the same politicians. I fell for the same old lies. They were just playing with my emotions, telling me what I wanted to hear. That's not right. Then I realized that I have the power. And there is an alternative.
Stop the cycle of political abuse.
Do you have a group or organization founded on the principles of personal liberty, health freedom, or accountable government? We invite you to check out Same Side Entertainment. Get connected with leaders in the liberty movement like Tom Woods, Kevin Gutzman, Jack Hunter, Robert Scott Bell, Michael Scheuer, and many more. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and our website at www.samesideentertainment.com. Again, that's www.samesideentertainment.com. Same Side Entertainment, connecting you with the education and resources you need.
Hello, fellow patriots. This is Joseph Nazari, Director of Training Operations with Line of Fire LLC, Professional Firearms Training Group, located in Las Vegas, Nevada. The fact that you're listening to this show is evidence to me that you are a true patriot and you do value your freedoms. As all patriots know, with freedom comes responsibility, and if you own a firearm, training should be an integral part of your personal defense profile. If you're considering quality firearms training, Line of Fire LLC should be your first choice. We teach all types of firearms training for all types of individuals, from the novice to the most advanced shooters. At Line of Fire LLC, we have a course for you. Please feel free to call us today at 702-242-8288. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Once again, that's Line of Fire LLC, 702-242-8288.
Emergency service. All operators are busy.
Oh God, please help me. He's got a knife.
You have reached the 911 emergency service. All operators are busy. Stay on the line for the next available emergency operator. You have reached the 911 emergency service. All operators are busy. Please stay on.
911 operator, what's your emergency, please? Hello? Hello?
Last year in the United States, thousands and thousands of 911 calls went unanswered. And if you call from a cell phone, there's no way to pinpoint where you are. Yet politicians like Dianne Feinstein call for more gun control. We have one question. Why do these politicians have armed bodyguards? Can't they just call 911?
You out of my mind. Always
All right, we are back. For those of you just joining us, we're talking with Mark Hayden and Heather Bodine from the Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. That is a mouthful. And if you want to give us a call, the phone number is 567-314-9296, 1234. And you could always get us at fprnradio.com and speak to us through the chat room and ask questions there as well. Mark, you were discussing before we went to break the reception at CPAC. Could you reiterate what you were saying towards the end?
Absolutely. I mean, we brought a lot of state people with us, so we had connections with everybody we talked to, regardless of where in the country they were from. But like I said before, the most common quote we heard was, "Where have you guys been for so long? I thought it was only conservative that believe we should repeal the death penalty." But we had other great quotes, too. We had one person walk up to our table, and I don't know if you've been to CPAC, but they give you so much swag. So you've got these bags full of stuff. And as soon as he saw our trade show display and read it and saw what we were doing, he dropped everything in his hands and walked up and started hugging us. And that's reminiscent of the kind of reception we got at CPAC. I mean, we were inundated by people. We were one of the busiest booths on our row, and everybody just seemed so supportive. And that has spilled over to the other events that we've gone to. Ben Jones, one of our colleagues, was at the Kansas Young Americans for Liberty State Conference. They asked him to sit on a panel and talk about what they were doing. He had hundreds of people sign up to volunteer, just like we did at CPAC, and Tom, you saw me at the Republican Liberty Caucus convention. We decided to go a different route. Instead of working the booth, I went into the panels and talked to people individually. And everybody there, it was a foregone conclusion. Obviously, we're opposed to the death penalty. We're conservatives. This is the conservative thing to do. And that's what we're seeing in all these different events. And that's this kind of reception that we're getting is why we're getting invited to more events. We were just invited to CPAC St. Louis coming up this fall, and I believe we may sit on a panel there. We're going to be back at CPAC next year. The Young Americans for Liberty Conference coming up this summer in Arlington, Virginia. We should be there. And additionally, I was invited by Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty to come up to their Justice Day on the Hill at the Tennessee Capitol. And we talked to different people there. We talked to some legislators, and it was just fantastic to hear what these people were thinking. They didn't know that there was other conservatives in Tennessee that believe that we should repeal the death penalty. And then when we told them why, they welcomed us with open arms, and we're still talking to them. We're building relationships with them. So this is what we're running across nationally, and each state is like this. And we're starting to hear of other groups within different states that are saying they want to start doing conservative outreach just like we're doing, but just on the state level. So we're having a great time with this, and we're being welcomed with open arms just about everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you were received at the Republican Liberty Caucus. I figured they'd be really open and receptive to you just because of the group of conservatives that they are. They're more of the libertarian side of Republicans.
They are definitely libertarian-leaning Republicans, and they still fall under the umbrella of being conservative. At least they do in my book. They may label themselves differently, but yes, very supportive, very open. I don't know how many business cards I walked away with, and I'm talking with many of them, of course, you being one of them, and each one wants to get involved in varying degrees and in different ways. But it was a great experience, and we hope to maybe go again.
Yeah. And you said there's been push for states to start their own chapters. Did I understand that correctly?
Sure. As we talk and travel from state to state or go to some of these national conferences, we're talking to a lot of people that are interested in doing that. And if they do want to go that way, we'll definitely help them. Kansas is kind of leading the way on that. Ben Jones, like I mentioned, he is working the conservatives concerned on the ground in that state. We've also had interest from other states like Kentucky and North Carolina and Nebraska as well. I mean, these are very red states. So
Yeah.
these aren't, don't confuse them for anything else. They're very Republican. They're very conservative. So we are having it in some great locations.
Have either of you heard of any successes in the short time that you've been a formal organization of states proposing legislation to repeal the death penalty at the state level?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, Maryland just became the 6th state in 6 years to end the death penalty, and that actually happened while we were in Maryland for CPAC. So we got to be in the state while that was happening, which was really exciting. And Governor O'Malley just recently actually signed the bill, but it passed while we were there. And so there's definitely a real national momentum that's happening. And like I said before, just folks who are waking up to the realities of the death penalty system and realizing that it's just not worth it anymore. And so we have, lots of state legislatures that are taking a look at the death penalty. Nebraska recently debated a bill and got more support for their bill than they had ever gotten before. Montana has run a bill the past couple of sessions, and we expect that many more states, will be proposing legislation. Delaware also recently had a bill in their session. So there's a real national momentum that's happening, and I think you can expect to see that many more states are going to be abandoning the death penalty very soon.
In Nebraska, they did a couple test votes. They had the majority votes to pass repeal. It was just a very small minority that actually filibustered it to prevent that from happening.
Wow. Well, hopefully they could figure out. I'm assuming they figured out who the minority were that were filibustering and either turn them around or replace them so that they could actually pass this sensible law through. When you were talking about Maryland, I thought it was interesting that they got rid of the death penalty, but they were the reason now that you could go and take DNA when someone gets arrested. But that's another topic for another day.
Absolutely.
Do you think more people being open to it, being against the death penalty, one of the contributing factors is for many years it's just been disproportionately minorities that were being targeted for the death penalty, not targeted, but given the death penalty, and the poor. And now that more folks are out of work and making less money, that they realize that they're no longer impervious to this, that this falsely being sent to death or sentenced to death could actually happen to them.
Well, people, as you can see, are with the wrongful convictions that are happening with very alarmingly frequently. I think everybody is saying that this could possibly happen to you. You don't have to do anything to be wrongly convicted, really. And you can look at the case with Kirk Bloodsworth, which Heather, you know personally, and you could probably talk a little bit about his case.
Sure. Yes. You made me think of him, Tom, when you brought up Maryland and DNA, actually, because he was the first person in the U.S. to be exonerated because of DNA evidence, and he was on death row in Maryland. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know him through this work, and he spoke several times in Montana when I worked there and told his story. But he's a former Marine, no criminal background, no record, and was convicted of murdering a 9-year-old little girl, and had nothing whatsoever to do with it. Spent, I think it was 7 years at least on death row in Maryland. His mother passed away while he was serving time on death row, so he was never able to be released while she was alive. I mean, just really horrific case, not to mention the fact that the real murderer was still out and about, and this little girl's family was led to believe that Kirk Bloodsworth was the killer when in fact he was not. But eventually DNA was able to clear him, and he's now out and works for an organization, which is a wonderful organization called Witness to Innocence, which exists to give a platform to folks like him who are death row exonerees so that they can speak about their experience and hopefully let the public know that this does happen, that it's not just people who were, at the wrong place at the wrong time and involved in a bad crowd. You don't have to have any criminal record and you can end up on death row in this country. And that's a little terrifying to think that can happen in the United States of America, but we know that there have been over 140 people exonerated from death row across our country since the 1970s, and that's a very alarming number.
And many of them were they were exonerated. They were so in spite of the system. And, you talk about Kirk Bloodsworth being exonerated through DNA evidence. I mean, it's important to underline that only 5 to 10% of criminal cases have any DNA evidence. So you can't rely on that. So I don't know how many others may be wrongly convicted, but they don't have the DNA evidence to back their claims up.
Right. And many times it's not, through the work of a great attorney even that these folks are found innocent. A lot of times it's through, groups like the Innocence Project or college students at universities who take on a specific case to try to prove this person's innocence. I mean, it's fascinating and mind-blowing how some of these cases come about, but there's no real way that we can stand on to say, okay, we can rely on this to prove this person innocent. And that's scary when you're talking about life and death.
And oftentimes they rely on police coercion or eyewitness testimony, which is very unreliable. I can think of one case where they came back to talk to the eyewitness, who was the only eyewitness, and they said, "How sure are you what that person that got executed was the right guy?" He said, 50% maybe. That should make us all very uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. When you were talking about, when we started talking about DNA again, it reminded me of when I was reading about court cases where DNA would have exonerated the person being accused, and it was actually turned down or kept from evidence by the either by the DA or the judge ruled it inadmissible. I don't know if you've come across cases like that or want to discuss that at all.
Well, the appeals process is not to introduce new evidence. The appeals process is to see that you had a fair trial. So reintroducing evidence is very difficult to do, and that's problematic. And I think we should all have problems with that. Heather, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. We can talk about another case. Ray Crone, who was sentenced to death in Arizona for rape and murder there, even though there was DNA found on the victim and it didn't match him, the state argued that the DNA could not be submitted since the jury found him guilty without physical evidence. So, I mean, you're absolutely right, Tom. There are cases where there's DNA available and a judge can rule it's not going to be admissible or it's not going to be tested. I mean, that's a real problem.
Yeah, and with the appeals, I always assumed that the reason for appeals was to make sure they got it right the first time, but it's just to see if there was any technical errors.
That's right.
And not adding any new evidence, which doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
And even when it comes to technicalities, you're more likely to still be put to death if they find a technicality than to overturn it. A technicality is not going to save you, most likely. Right.
And what do you say to people who say, "Well, I'm still for the death penalty. I agree with you that it costs too much. Is there a way we could just make it cheaper?"
There's been a lot of attempts to fix the death penalty process to make it cheaper, but when you do that, you shorten an appeals process that is supposed to be there to try to save people from being put to death if they're innocent, even though it doesn't work very well. So when you shorten that, you virtually guarantee that innocent people will be put to death. You may want to save money, but you definitely don't want to kill an innocent person. So you're going to break or you're going to make a program that doesn't work well, not work at all at that point.
Right, and we have states like Illinois who've done countless studies and have tried and tried for years, and Maryland too, actually, but Illinois is the example that comes to mind, where they really tried to make a workable death penalty system there. And they have a large number of folks who are exonerated from death row. And actually, George Ryan, when he was the governor there, he ended up commuting everyone's sentence to life without parole when they were on death row, because he was finding so many problems in so many of the cases that he could no longer support the death penalty in the state of Illinois. And obviously, Illinois recently abandoned their death penalty a few years ago and passed an abolition bill there. But we know there's just no way to fix the death penalty system. The American Law Institute, who sort of authored our modern day death penalty system, has also abandoned it and said there is no way to make it workable. There's no way to make it work well. We do not support the death penalty anymore, even though they authored the original version.
And then you have states like Florida that are trying to pass a bill called the Timely Justice Act, which shortens the appeals process. And they have several former inmates, individuals who were actually exonerated. They're going to the Capitol and they've been speaking with people because they would have been put to death. With the system that they're trying to pass, if the governor signs it, they would have died. And you have this is a long process to try to get off or try to get exonerated. There's, I think, as high as 33 years, that's how long it took for many to actually be exonerated. And when you do that, you are guaranteeing that innocent people will die, and we cannot permit that.
Yeah. It's shocking that the United States is one of three or four countries in the world that actually have a death penalty. I don't know if you know the stats on that
right.
at all.
We definitely kill a lot of our own citizens, and we keep company with some countries that I think we'd rather not. That's for certain, like Afghanistan and China and others, Iran, who execute many of their citizens. So that's something that folks are concerned about as well.
Yeah. When I was looking through some of the cases of exonerated people, or people who were actually executed, and then for all may have actually been innocent. The one case comes to mind, Cameron Todd Willingham, fellow who was executed in Texas. Maybe you guys could expand on that at all if you know anything about that case.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that. So yes, he was executed in Texas in 2004 for setting fire to his home and killing his 3 children that were inside. So it was an arson case. And now experts are saying that the arson theories that were used in the investigation are junk science, basically. And so there's very good cause to believe that he may have been innocent and that he did not set this fire. I cannot imagine, being accused of something like that, let alone being executed for it. And the fact that he did maintain his innocence throughout. So we'll never know. That's another really difficult thing about the death penalty, is that once a person is executed, it's pretty much impossible to go back and say definitively if this person was innocent or guilty. And so we won't ever really know for sure. But what we do know is that the science that was used to convict him, experts say, is junk science. So that's at the very least very concerning, and he may very well have been innocent. Right.
Yeah. There's a lot to be concerned about with the death penalty, the cost, the ending of a life, and being unsure that you've got the right person. Just a whole host of, just a big can of worms that for some reason a lot of states still want to keep open.
That's right. And if I could talk about another part of this too, Tom, that we've talked about a little bit, but we've talked about, is there a way to shorten the appeals process? And we've said not really, because we don't want to execute innocent people, but we need to realize what this death penalty process does to family members who've had a loved one murdered. They've just been through this extremely traumatic process of losing a loved one. I mean, murder is always horrific and always heinous. And then they're told, we're going to execute this guy. We're going to get the death penalty. And by the way, not all of them get that opportunity, obviously. There are many who want the death penalty and the case isn't eligible, or the prosecutor doesn't decide to go for it. So that can send a message that some lives are worth more than others, which is a problem. But these families are promised, closure, and that, they'll be able to move on with their lives, after this person is executed. So then they're forced to wait 20-something years, usually, on average, for this death sentence to be carried out, if it's ever carried out, which in many states, like Pennsylvania, where you all don't execute very frequently, the sentence may never be carried out and the person might die of natural causes in prison. So this family is forced to relive this trauma through this entire appeals process that goes on for decades. And then, if the person is executed, they don't feel better at the end of it, usually. There is no sense of closure. And many of them say, if I had known what sort of torture this would have been like for me and my family, I would have said from the beginning, I wish that we could have just gone with life without parole. So this system really re-traumatizes them. It does not answer their needs. When asked what they need, many of them say they need counseling, or they need support from their community. It's not that they need the death penalty. It does not help them. It does not benefit them. So that's another aspect of this very problematic death penalty system.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when you mentioned Pennsylvania, it reminds me of I believe it was George Banks. I believe he killed his family, if I remember the story correctly, back in the 70s. And he was sentenced to death. He's still on death row today.
Right.
I believe Pennsylvania has over 200 people on death row, which makes them the fourth highest in the United States after Texas, Florida, and California.
Yeah, and I'm actually right down the street from where the one of the death chambers are located. It's right here in State College. And I don't think they've used it in several decades. So.
Right, but it's on your books and will continue to cost the taxpayers money in the state of Pennsylvania, and that's a problem that's similar to when I lived in Montana. There are only 2 people on death row in Montana currently, but both of them have been there my entire lifetime, and I just turned 29. So no real date set in sight, and so we have this expensive program, but basically what it is a very expensive life without parole sentence that these folks are serving.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think nationally we have over 3,000 people on death row. Only 43 were executed last year. So there's programs in place. We're paying for it, but we're not using it that much. I mean, it doesn't work anyway. We need to just get rid of the program. Is my personal point of view on that.
Exactly. We're coming up towards the end of the hour, and I know you guys said that you would have to go. So I don't know if you want to put out information on how they could reach you and anything like that, or have any last words to say.
Absolutely. If they want more information, they can go to conservativesconcern.org. They can sign up on there if they want to get more information. They can also send us an email at info@conservativesconcern.org, or they can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/CCATDP, or on Twitter at twitter.com/CCATDP.
Okay. Well, Mark and Heather, I appreciate you guys coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having us. It's been great to be with you, Tom. We really appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess we have a minute before we have to go to break. So in closing, I just wanted to thank both of you again for doing this. And we'll definitely have to speak again because the death penalty is pretty archaic, flawed, costly, and it's something we should really do away with. So I appreciate all the work you guys are doing, and again, thank you.
Thanks
so much, Tom.
All right, folks, that was Mark Hayden and Heather Bodine of the Montana Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. I will be able to say that eventually without stuttering and going and getting my tongue all tied up. All right, I will see you folks after the break.